She hated mornings, but today she hated the janitor more. The scent of bleach and fallen leaves drifted through the morning air as she walked briskly across the stone-lined courtyard. Her designer heels struck the ground in sharp, deliberate clicks like punctuation marks of entitlement. Then she stopped, wrinkled her nose. A hunched figure in a faded janitor's uniform was scrubbing the floor with a worn-out broom. "Could you step aside, you? You're socked, you. Smell awful," she said, loud enough for others to hear, and made no effort to hide her disgust. The old man paused, bowed his head slightly, and said nothing. No one nearby spoke up. They'd grown used to her tone. Her name was Chelsea, daughter of the man who owned half the town. And in her world, silence from others only confirmed she was right. She took another step, fanned her fingers as if brushing the stench from her path, and scoffed. "I don't know how someone like that even gets hired." Behind her, a mother tightened her grip on her child's hand. The janitor, still bent at the waist, simply resumed scrubbing the stone, his rhythm unchanged. But 3 days from now, this courtyard and everything around it would no longer belong to Chelsea's family. Chelsea didn't see the way the janitor looked after her, not with bitterness, but a calm that had weathered storms. His silence wasn't submission, it was the weight of someone who'd already lived through louder days. Around them, people exchanged glances but stayed still, frozen by power or apathy. It didn't matter. Chelsea thought influence meant being loud, being seen. But sometimes presence says more than a name. If this feels like just another tale of arrogance, keep watching. Because what no one knew, not even Chelsea, was that the quiet man she tried to erase had once saved everything they took for granted. And this is how the story truly begins. Chelsea Harper had grown up in a world paved with granite countertops and soft leather interiors. Her father owned Harper Holdings, the name, etched on the glass doors of the town's central shopping district, the Plaza, and even the theater marquee downtown. To her, the Plaza wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was an inherited kingdom, and everyone else were simply tenants on borrowed time. When her father fell ill last winter, whispers began swirling about who would take over. The board had questions. Investors grew skittish, but Chelsea remained calm. After all, wasn't she already running things in spirit? That morning, after brushing past the janitor, she strutted into the management office like she owned it, because technically, she almost did. "We need to replace that guy," she told the assistant manager flatly, dropping her bag on the polished table. "He's an eyesore." The assistant hesitated. "He's only been here a week, ma'am?" Chelsea raised an eyebrow. And that's already a week too long. The third incident came on a breezy Thursday, just before noon. The plaza was unusually busy, families gathering near the fountain, children chasing pigeons across the square. Walter was crouched near the base of the statue, picking up shards of broken glass someone had left behind. Chelsea spotted him from the balcony cafe above and made her descent like a stage performer hitting her cue. With every step, her heels struck louder, drawing eyes. When she reached him, she didn't speak at first. Just stood there, arms folded, watching as he carefully lifted each fragment and placed it in a small trash bag. Then, loud enough to slice through the courtyard chatter, she said, "Do you even know who I am?" Walter paused, one hand still hovering over the last piece of glass. He looked up, his expression unreadable, eyes steady. "Yes," he said calmly, "I do." There was no sarcasm in his tone, no resistance. But something about the way he said it silenced even the pigeons. As Chelsea turned away with a satisfied flick of her hair, a boy nearby tugged on his grandfather's coat. "Why was that lady yelling at him?" the child asked, eyes wide and confused. The old man didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his glasses, watching Walter quietly gather his things and move on, as if nothing had happened. "That man," he finally said, his voice low, "once saved your father's business. Long before you were born." The boy looked puzzled. "But he's just a janitor." The grandfather knelt, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and whispered, "People aren't always what they look like." A few feet away, Walter had paused. He hadn't turned around, but the corner of his mouth lifted just enough for someone paying attention to notice. By the end of that week, Chelsea's voice had become a fixture in the plaza. Commands, complaints, corrections flung casually like confetti at a parade no one asked for. She told the florist to move her display. Told the cafe manager the patio chairs were off-center and depressing. She even accused a mother of letting her child scuff the marble bench near the fountain. But Walter he remained unchanged. One morning, a staff meeting was held in the back office. Chelsea barged in, late and fuming. "Why is that janitor still here?" she demanded, slamming her tablet on the table. "He's not union. He's not on our old contractor list. Who hired him?" No one spoke. Only later, when the room had emptied, did Walter quietly walk in and speak to the assistant manager. They spoke for 2 minutes. Quiet, measured words. Then he left. A young intern, who had watched from the hallway, couldn't help but wonder, why does he even know the office staff? It started subtly. A pause too long before someone answered her. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. A door that once opened quickly now hesitated on its hinges. Chelsea noticed, but brushed it off. Until one afternoon, as she strutted across the plaza toward the bakery, she spotted Walter helping a delivery man lift a heavy crate off a truck. Nothing unusual except that the man clapped him on the back, laughing as if greeting an old friend. Even the barista waved. Next to worm, Chelsea frowned. Inside the bakery, she ordered her usual almond croissant, warm, not toasted. But when the young cashier rang her up, he spoke carefully, without eye contact. "We're, out of warm ones. Just regular today." She glanced at the tray behind him. 3 warm croissants sat steaming in the glass case. Behind her, someone muttered, "About time." She spun around. The voice was gone. The plaza, usually her stage, now felt like it had shadows she couldn't read. That evening, something in her snapped. Chelsea stormed out of the office building, phone clutched in one hand, heels stabbing at the pavement. Her face was flushed, her voice sharp. "Do I have to do everything myself?" she barked into the phone. "Fire him. I don't care who hired him, find a way." Just then, she saw him. Walter, carefully trimming the overgrown hedges near the old fountain. He wore the same faded uniform, the same quiet demeanor. He didn't even look up. She marched toward him. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "Walking around like you belong here, smiling at everyone like some grandfatherly saint." He turned, slow and steady. "I've never once smiled at you, Miss Harper." The words weren't cruel. They were just true, and somehow that cut deeper. She stood frozen, unsure what to say. Around them, the plaza had gone still. Even the pigeons seemed to wait for her response. She had none. She didn't return to the plaza for 2 days. When she finally did, something felt off. The fountain's water seemed clearer. The benches cleaner. Even the flowers, those neglected planters lining the walkway, were blooming. She didn't know if someone had repainted the old lampposts or if she'd simply never noticed them before. Walter was there, always there, trimming, sweeping, fixing a bent signpost near the bakery entrance. People greeted him now, openly. Some stopped to chat. A child offered him a candy. Chelsea watched from a distance. No one approached her. She sat alone at the cafe, stirring coffee she didn't really want. Her reflection in the window stared back blurred, uncertain. For the first time, she wondered, how much did she actually know about the man she tried to erase? And beneath that question, another she didn't dare voice. Had everyone else known all along? That morning, the assistant manager found something unusual in the break room, a leather-bound notebook, old and frayed at the edges, sitting alone on the table. The front was marked only with a small gold W. He opened it. Inside were sketches, detailed diagrams of the plaza, every storefront, every bench, even the underground piping. Some drawings were dated 10, 15 years ago. Others, more recent, were annotated with comments like structural stress near fountain base or sunlight shifts, best spot for kids to play. Tucked between 2 pages was a faded photograph, the plaza on opening day, back in 1986. In the corner stood a much younger man, holding a mop, smiling beside a woman in a summer dress. "Is this Walter?" the assistant whispered aloud. "Behind him," a voice replied softly. "It always has been." He turned. Walter was standing at the doorway, not surprised. not angry, just watching. As the afternoon shadows stretched long across the courtyard, inside the dim security booth, the night watchman leaned back in his creaky chair, sipping lukewarm coffee. The assistant manager slid in, the notebook still in hand. "You ever notice anything off about Walter?" he asked. The watchman raised an eyebrow. "Off, you mean how he knows the serial numbers of every bench in this plaza, or how he fixes electrical panels faster than the contractors?" "That notebook," the assistant said, laying it down. "It's not just sketches. It's a full archive." The old man chuckled. "Let me tell you something. When I started here, 22 years ago, there was this guy, quiet, sharp, knew this place like the back of his hand, never wore a suit, but walked like he built the floor he stood on." He tapped the notebook. "That guy, that's him." The assistant stared at the watchman. "Then why is he pushing a broom?" The watchman smiled. "Maybe he's waiting to see who's still watching." There was something in the air that day, subtle, but unmistakable. A quiet shift, like a page had turned while no one was looking. Chelsea sensed it before she even stepped out of her car. The air felt lighter, almost expectant. She walked slower than usual, eyes scanning without purpose. It wasn't fear, not yet, but her chest carried a weight she couldn't quite place. She passed by the bookstore and caught the owner chatting with Walter. They laughed genuinely. The florist offered him a paper cone of dried lavender. "For your shelf," she said. Even the teenage skater who usually mocked everyone gave him a nod. Chelsea paused mid-step. When had this started? She spotted Walter near the fountain, adjusting one of the tiles at its base. Their eyes met. No smile, no malice. "He to us, sir." Just recognition. A strange chill settled in her spine. Not fear. Something worse. Wardhassen is Sessonin. Displacement. This was her Plaza. Her name was on half the paperwork in City Hall. And yet when he stood there, surrounded by the buildings and people, it was as if he belonged, and she didn't. She turned and walked away, but the echo of her own heels sounded unfamiliar. Later that week, Chelsea crossed paths with Walter near the garden beds. He was kneeling in the dirt, planting quietly. She hesitated, then approached not with her usual stride, but slower. "You really know this place, don't you?" she asked. Walter didn't look up. "I've been here a while." Chelsea shifted her stance. "Why do you care so much?" A pause. Then because someone had to. The words hung in the air, not sharp, not smug. Just true. She didn't reply. Just turned and walked off. And for the first time, it wasn't clear who had ended the conversation. That evening, long after the shops had closed and the last lights in the cafe dimmed, Walter stood alone near the eastern wall of the plaza, the oldest part, left untouched even after 3 renovations. He traced the uneven line of bricks until his fingers paused on one smaller, slightly lighter in color, and etched faintly with 2 names, Eleanor 1987. He brushed away a layer of dust with the cuff of his sleeve. Beneath it, the engraving was still clear. For a moment, the years fell away. He could hear laughter echoing from the old record store, smell the cinnamon from Eleanor's favorite bun stall. She'd carved the name herself. The year they danced together in the plaza on a summer night, no one else remembered but him. Walter didn't say a word. He simply leaned forward, placed his palm flat against the brick, and closed his eyes. The wind moved softly around him, and the plaza breathed, like it always had, slow, steady, and full of memory. The plaza clock had been broken for weeks. A sleek young technician had come by twice, tinkering with tools and mumbling about imported parts. Still, the hands remained stuck at 3:47. One morning, Walter stood beneath the clock tower, alone. He removed his gloves, reached into a pocket, and pulled out a tiny brass key, one that hadn't been used since the original installation in 1987. With deliberate movements, he climbed the narrow maintenance ladder behind the structure. No one noticed except Theo, the technician, who had returned to double-check his wiring. "What are you doing up there?" Theo called. Walter didn't answer. He turned the key once, twice, then adjusted a small gear behind the minute hand. A click and a marfana, a faint whir. Then, for the first time in years, the clock chimed. Theo stood in stunned silence. "How did you know how to do that?" Walter smiled, descending slowly. I helped install it. A long time ago. He lingered, long enough for the air to hum with memory. And just like that, the past returned. The plaza had just opened that summer. The bricks were redder then, the fountain freshly sealed, its water shimmering under the July sun. The town buzzed with the kind of hopeful noise only a brand new shopping square could bring. And Walter, barely 22, had just landed his first real job floor cleaner at the corner ice cream parlor. He was quiet even then, quick to fix things others ignored. But it was Eleanor who noticed him first. She worked at the record store 3 doors down, wore long skirts, sang to herself while restocking vinyls, and carried around a book of pressed flowers. He remembered the first words she said to him like they were etched in stone. You mop floors like you're trying to save them. He laughed. She hadn't smiled, just looked at him straight and added, good floors deserve someone who respects them. That night, he walked her home. The air smelled like cinnamon and asphalt. They stopped by the fountain. She dipped her fingers in the water, then touched his forehead. For luck, she said. 2 years later, under the same twilight sky, Walter led Eleanor into the small garden tucked behind the fountain, a quiet corner most visitors didn't even notice. It was where she always paused after work to sit, sketch, and breathe. That night, he'd strung up tiny white lights between the trees. Nothing fancy, just borrowed bulbs and careful knots. She laughed when she saw it, covered her mouth with both hands. You did all this. He knelt in the grass. No ring box, no speech, just a silver band in his palm and a single line. Let's make this place ours. They were married by spring. A year later, he brought their daughter here, swaddled in yellow blankets, cheeks pink from the breeze. Eleanor sat on the bench, sketching as always, while he walked slow circles around the fountain, humming an off-key lullaby. It wasn't just a plaza to him anymore. It was where he became a husband, a father, subwassorin, a man who built something with his own hands, not just brick and mortar, but moments no storm could ever take. It happened too quickly. A sudden illness, a misdiagnosis, a winter that came too hard. Eleanor was gone before spring returned. One week he was reading her favorite poem by the garden bench, and the next he stood there alone, fingers clenched around a folded scarf that still smelled faintly of lavender. People moved on. That's what towns do. Stores closed, new ones open. Names changed on the windows. But Walter stayed. He came back to the plaza the day after the funeral, sat on their bench, listened to the fountain, watched the bricks absorb the sun like nothing had changed. And that's when he knew the world may forget. But stone remembers. Every laugh, every promise, every goodbye whispered through gritted teeth, this place held it all. So he made himself a part of it. Not in plaques or papers, but in presence, in silence. He picked up the broom again, not as a janitor, as a witness. Now, decades later, Walter's fingers still found that same bench before sunrise. He no longer sat, not often, but he always paused just long enough to brush off the leaves, to realign the cushions no one else touched. No one knew why he lingered at the garden's edge, why he swept that particular corner with more care than any other, or why, once a year, he tucked a sprig of dried lavender behind the old lamppost near the fountain. To them, he was just the janitor, the one who arrived early, left late, and never missed a day. But to Walter, every stone he touched was a memory made solid. Every crack he patched was a vow kept alive. And so he worked, quiet, consistent, unseen but always watching. Because places forget faster than people do, unless someone chooses to remember them, brick by brick. That morning, the sky over the plaza looked different, washed out, like a painting left too long in the sun. Clouds drifted low and slow, thickening by the hour. The air held a tension it hadn't before. Even the pigeons flew lower. A notice was taped to the information board near the fountain. Few read it in full, but the headline was enough: Development Proposal Urban Renewal Project. Final review pending. Definer. People whispered. Some shrugged. Others frowned and walked faster. Chelsea stood at the edge of the courtyard, unreadable behind her sunglasses. She already knew. Janitor. The board had been pushing for weeks, investors circling like vultures. The Plaza, once the pride of her family, had become a financial liability. This, she told herself, was business. But Walter read the notice. Too. He didn't frown, didn't tear it down, just stood there staring at the words as if tasting each one. And when he turned away, the clouds above finally broke just a little and cast the Plaza in a strange, silver light. Chelsea found her father in his office above the theater, one of the few buildings they still fully owned. The windows overlooked the Plaza, but he rarely looked out anymore. "Did you see the proposal notice?" she asked. He nodded, slow and tired. The oxygen tank beside his chair hissed with each breath. "It's moving faster than I thought." She folded her arms. "I thought we were holding the majority. We were one window mine, or one until a few months ago. Someone's been buying up shares quietly, through shell companies." She blinked. Who? I don't know," he admitted. "But they're not planning to demolish. That's the odd part." "What then?" He looked at her for the first time. "Restore it. Preserve the structure. Even the name. Like they care about it." Chelsea scoffed. That makes no sense." But her father's gaze didn't waver. "It does if they remember it differently than you do." He turned to the window then, watching Walter sweep the edge of the garden. "Some ghosts don't want to be forgotten. Some come back." Quietly. By midweek, the Plaza had changed. It wasn't the buildings or the signs, but the way people moved. Slower. More careful. Conversations grew quieter when Walter passed. Not out of discomfort, but something closer to reverence. Whispers floated like dust on a breeze. "They say he's connected to the buyer." "No way. He's just the janitor." "Have you seen that notebook he carries? It's like a blueprint of the entire Plaza." Even the cafe staff, once deferential to Chelsea, now offered Walter free coffee without a word. A local reporter stopped by to ask about the garden renovations. Walter simply nodded and kept pruning. Chelsea watched from the second-floor window of the old tailor's building, jaw tight. Something was slipping, but she didn't yet know what. And when she glanced down, Walter was already looking up. Not smiling, not frowning, just watching like he'd always been. That Friday, the sky didn't rise. It hovered low, gray, and unmoving like a lid placed over the town. The breeze, once crisp and playful, had turned damp and still. The Plaza felt like it was holding its breath. Chelsea stood outside the management office, arms crossed, her phone buzzing unanswered in her pocket. She'd had enough. Enough of the glances, enough of the silence, enough of Walter. She marched across the square, past the bakery, past the fountain, straight toward him. He was fixing the wiring beneath an old lamp post, sleeves rolled, brow calm. "You need to stop whatever this is," she snapped. Walter looked up. "This this performance." Her voice rose. "You think people actually believe you're just a janitor?" He stood slowly, not threatening, just taller than she remembered. "I've never claimed anything I wasn't," he said quietly. "Can you say the same?" Thunder cracked somewhere far off. Not loud, but enough to make her flinch. And the first drops of rain began to fall. The email came at 7:03 a.m. Imemi in commemoration. Subject line in all caps. Mandatory Plaza stakeholder meeting, 21. Every year in. Today. No signature. No contact name. Just the location: Town Hall, Room B. By 10 o'clock, the room buzzed with murmurs. Store owners, investors, a few curious townsfolk. Chelsea arrived last, phone in hand, heels sharp against the linoleum. She scanned the crowd, found no familiar faces from corporate. Her father hadn't come. At the front of the room, a projector hummed. A simple slide glowed on screen: Plaza renewal proposal, presented by new majority shareholder. Whispers swelled. Chelsea leaned toward the assistant manager. "Who the hell is the new majority?" Before he could answer, the door opened. Walter walked in. No uniform, no gloves, just a pressed button-down shirt, dark slacks, and that same quiet expression. He nodded politely, stepped to the podium, and began to speak. Not as a janitor, not as an employee, but as the man who now owned more than half the plaza. Walter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke with the same calm he used to sweep the plaza. Except this time, every word echoed. I've spent the past 2 years acquiring quiet shares, he said. Not to redevelop, not to demolish you, but to restore every bench, every brick, every memory. A murmur rippled through the room. One man near the back let out a soft whistle. A woman clutched her bag tighter, eyes fixed. He clicked the remote. Photos flashed on screen. The plaza in 1986, the original garden. The fountain before renovations stripped its curves. A design plan followed labeled Memory Preservation Project showing community spaces, restored shop fronts, green areas for public use. This place, Walter continued, isn't just property. It's the memory of 1,000 ordinary days. And I believe that matters. A pause. Then a hand clapped. Then another. Then the whole room. Chelsea didn't move. She sat frozen in her chair, eyes locked on the screen, jaw clenched. The man she'd mocked, dismissed, tried to erase was the very one preserving everything her family had once claimed to love. And all he did was sweep. As the applause faded, an older woman stood slowly near the back of the room. She wore a faded denim jacket, her gray hair tied back in a scarf patterned with sunflowers. I remember him, she said, voice steady. Back when I ran the flower cart, he fixed the wheel on my stand when no one else would touch it. Never asked for money. She turned toward the crowd. He was always here. Before most of us opened shop, after most of us locked up. When my husband passed, he swept around my cart in silence. That silence was the only comfort I had for weeks. The room fell still again, but this time, not out of shock. Out of knowing. One by one, heads nodded. People exchanged glances. More than a few lowered their eyes, as if realizing they'd looked away too long. Walter didn't respond. Didn't bow. He simply folded the papers in front of him, placed them in his briefcase, and stepped away from the podium. No mic drop. No grand exit. Just a man walking out with his dignity finally visible. Chelsea stood, slowly. Not out of shame, but as if unsure what remained of her role. No one clapped. No one scowled. They simply watched. It occurred. She turned toward the door, her reflection flickering across the projection screen like a ghost of a name that no longer held the room. In the hallway, footsteps echoed faintly behind her, but she didn't look back. Walter stayed behind, near the exit, collecting his papers like a man cleaning up after a storm. He never looked at her, but he didn't have to. The silence said enough. Chelsea returned to the plaza the next morning, not with her heels, not with her stride, but with smaller steps that didn't echo. The benches had been polished, the signs restored. Kids played where she once ruled. Walter wasn't there, yet he was everywhere in gestures, in details, in how people moved with purpose. A violinist played something familiar by the fountain. Eleanor's tune. She stopped, listened, and for the first time, felt like an outsider in a place that used to bear her name. Near the garden entrance, a small crowd had gathered not for protest or press, but celebration. A temporary sign hung across the Arch Community Appreciation Day, Walter's Garden Dedication. Chelsea hovered at the edge, unsure whether to join. She spotted the florist. The baker is here come on one to one. Even the skater kid, holding a tray of lemonade cups with startling care. At the center stood Walter, not behind a broom, but next to a wooden podium, listening as a young girl read a letter aloud. He made this place safe, the girl said. He never asked for anything. He just kept showing up. Chelsea's eyes burned, but she didn't blink, didn't cry. She stayed there, still, watching a man she'd once tried to erase being remembered out loud, and without shame. The applause died down. People began to disperse into small clusters, laughing, sharing stories, trading memories that no longer belonged to Chelsea's world. She stood a few steps behind them all, unnoticed at first, until someone turned and saw her. Then another, No one said a word. No one needed to. They didn't glare. Irmawe wanam, werimao. They didn't smile. Just watched her with a kind of distant awareness, like seeing something out of place on a shelf once familiar. The florist gave a polite nod. The cafe owner didn't meet her eyes. She wasn't being shunned. She was being released from a role she thought she'd earned by blood and title, from the illusion of ownership, and that somehow felt heavier than shame. Walter approached from the far end of the plaza. No podium now, no notes, just him, hands in his pockets, eyes steady as ever. He stopped a few feet from Chelsea, who stood rooted like a statue cracked at its base. She searched his face, maybe for accusation, maybe for grace. But he didn't offer either. He simply said, "Silence has its own kind of voice." Then he walked past her, toward the garden. And she didn't follow. The next morning, no one noticed her at first. Chelsea arrived early, long before the shops opened, dressed in jeans and an old sweatshirt, hair tied back without thought. She walked to the garden, gloves in one hand, a trash bag in the other. The flower beds were still fresh from the dedication, but wind had blown in candy wrappers, a few dead leaves, a plastic cup caught between the hedges. She didn't hesitate. She bent down and started clearing. No one asked her to. No one told her how. When the baker passed by on his morning delivery run, he paused, blinked, then kept walking, no greeting, no judgment, just acknowledgement. Chelsea kept working, quietly, one wrapper at a time. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she didn't feel the need to be seen. No one called her that morning. No one watched as she crouched near the garden with gloves and a trash bag. A few wrappers clung to the hedges. She picked them up, one by one, quietly. Not for attention, not for redemption, just because it needed doing. When the baker passed by, he glanced, nodded once, then moved on. No judgment, just acknowledgement. She kept going. And with every motion, she found something steadier than pride purpose without audience. By the end of the week, a new sign appeared at the entrance to the garden. Simple wood, hand-carved lettering. No gold trim, no sponsor logo. Just 4 words burned into the grain: Walter's Garden, a place to remember. No ceremony, no speech. Just a few neighbors gathered to watch it go up. The florist brought daisies. The barista played a soft tune on an old Bluetooth speaker. A child placed a pebble beneath the post, as if leaving a token for someone they'd never forget. Chelsea stood near the back, hands in her pockets. She didn't speak, didn't approach, but she stayed until the last nail was hammered in, until the crowd had thinned, until the wind picked up again and the leaves rustled through the hedges Walter had once trimmed by hand. By Sunday, the plaza felt different again, but this time not strange. Alive. Children chased one another around the fountain, their laughter bouncing off the stone like wind chimes. A guitarist strummed near the cafe, playing tunes older than the kids dancing to them. The bakery gave out samples just because. Chelsea knelt near the garden bed closest to the fountain, carefully arranging a line of pale blue blossoms. Forget-me-nots. Eleanor's favorite. Tikunanor de Sabon. She'd read it in a note Walter left tucked between pages of the plaza's archival book. No one asked why she chose them, but when the wind blew just right, the scent drifted across the walkway, and a few people turned to look, then smiled without speaking. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something quieter. Continuity. Not every legacy is etched in stone. Some are planted, watered, trimmed quietly in the corners. No one notices until one day they bloom, and people wonder who made it happen. Walter never needed a title, never chased applause. But in the end, he left something no money could buy: memory with roots. And Chelsea, she didn't erase her past. She replanted it. One flower, need a rich to awareness, de my command. One gesture, one silence at a time. Maybe that's how healing begins, not in speeches or grand apologies, but in showing up when no one's watching and staying long enough to matter. Near sunset, a figure sat alone on the farthest bench of the plaza. The garden behind him glowed gold in the dying light. The fountain bubbled gently, and music drifted from somewhere down the walkway, soft, familiar. Walter didn't move much, just sat, one hand resting on the cane he rarely used, the other on the wooden slats of the bench. People passed. Some waved. One child ran up, left a drawing on his lap, and ran off without a word. He smiled. Just a little, then leaned back, eyes half closed, as if listening to a memory only he could hear. The camera pulled back slowly, the plaza alive in every corner, and a final line faded onto the screen. Inspired by a true story. This story was brought to you by Unveiled Wealth, where legacy speaks louder than words. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in quiet kindness. And if you'd like more stories like this, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and stay a while.